So welcome to our public virtual open house where we are providing information about the CobbLinc proposed service changes. These proposed service changes would impact the CobbLinc green circulator, as well as the CobbLinc commuter routes 100, 101, and 102. My name is Morgan Simmons. I am one of the deputy directors with the Department of Transportation here for Cobb County, representing our intermodal services. And we'll be providing you information today that you will have an opportunity to provide public comment at any point in time between today and May 9th. Some important information that we just want to relay that all attendees are muted throughout the duration of the meeting, and it's just to allow for no interruption of noise. However, all attendees can send questions directly to myself and our staff. We will be responding to the questions during our Q&A break, which we have throughout the presentation, several throughout the presentation. This meeting is also being recorded, and it will be posted for future views for anyone that is unable to attend tonight, but also for anyone that perhaps would just like to review over information that was provided today. So our agenda includes explaining what is a service equity analysis, and explaining the process when it comes to major service changes. We'll talk about the two proposed service changes by themselves, and they will all each have their own Q&A section. Starting first with the proposed service change for the green circulator. We'll talk about the findings of the analysis, the service alternatives, and then of course have question and answer opportunity. Followed by the section talking about the proposed service change for the commuter routes 100, 101, and 102. We'll discuss the findings of the analysis, the service alternatives, and then provide question and answer opportunity for that section as well. And then finally, we will talk about next steps. What happens after today? So starting with the service equity analysis section. A service equity analysis is a requirement of our Federal Transit Administration under Title VI, and it prohibits the recipients of federal assistance, federal funding, from discrimination based on race, color, and/or national origin. This is very important when in considering any major service change as a transit provider. The purpose of the service equity analysis is to determine whether the proposed major service change would have a disparate impact on a protected class, such as minority community members. It also means that we have to consider low-income populations and determine whether there is going to be a disproportionate burden if the service change were to come into fruition. So keep in mind those major metrics there, measures. Disparate impact, which considers, does the service change negatively impact minority persons more than non-minority persons? And disproportionate burden, which does the service change negatively burden low-income persons more than non-low-income persons? So a major service change, as defined by CobbLinc's Title VI plan, includes the following: the elimination of an entire route or a portion of a route, a reduction in the service hours of any route by at least 20% or more, and the elimination of 20% or more of the stops on a route. So these are some of the things, the thresholds that determine whether a service equity analysis is triggered and whether a major service change is happening. As per the CobbLinc Title VI plan, when a major service change is proposed, some of the following steps are required that listed below here. We have to complete a service equity analysis, which is what we're going to talk about in detail, the findings. We have to complete a public hearing, and that is by way of our governing authority, which is the Board of Commissioners. We complete public meeting opportunities, whether in person or virtual. We provide a 30-day public comment period. as well as we receive approval by the governing authority, which is, for us, the Cobb County Board of Commissioners. So now that we've talked about the basics of a service equity analysis and generally what a major service change is and how we pretty much got here, we're going to talk about the two proposed service changes at hand today. First, starting with the green circulator. So a little bit of background. CobbLinc operates two circulator routes within the Cumberland area, the blue circulator and the green circulator. These two routes, they provide service throughout the Cumberland area, but definitely specific to Cumberland Mall, the Cobb Galleria Center, the Cobb Energy Performance Arts Center, as well as Truist Park, which is home of the Atlanta Braves. The green circulator is, as you can see on the map, it provides the more northern loop, providing service to Truist Park, but also providing service to the Wildwood Parkway area a little bit further north. This particular service provides a weekday as well as weekend service, with weekday service starting at noon going into 2 a.m., Saturday service starting at noon going to 2 a.m., as well as Sunday service from 11:30 a.m. to 6:30 p.m. The service frequencies consist of a range between 30 and 60 minutes across these 7 days. The proposed service change would be the removal of the green circulator. Reasons for this change include acting on recommendations of previous planning studies and the anticipated alternatives in the Cumberland area. We have several studies that have taken place in the last few years that indicated a significant amount of sprawled out demand throughout the green circulator service area. And so in response to that, there were recommendations that a fixed route was not the best mode to serve in this area, but perhaps there's some consideration for other modes such as microtransit or something more on demand to help target those areas a little bit better. Another reason was consideration of future funding opportunities and challenges. In response to the vote that took place in November, the loss of mobility spots unfortunately requires that the county has to take consideration some of the funding limitations of our system. And one of the things that came to mind was, of course, the consideration of routes that would have the least impact on our environmental justice and transit-dependent community members. And this is one of those routes that was identified to have the least impact. And then, of course, comparatively lower performance to the blue circulator. As you can see, the ridership with the circulator the green circulator has always tended to trend a little bit lower than the blue. And although there is some increase, we are seeing that there's a significant amount of transit access within this area that would be a good alternative in comparison to what is being served today. And then last but not least, the current transit alternative study that we have currently underway is showing the great opportunities for us to be able to redefine the transportation options within this area. It's called the Cumberland Transit Alternative Study, which is currently underway right now with Cobb County Department of Transportation, as well as in partnership with our Cumberland CID. The goal of this study is for us to be able to better understand transit access within the Cumberland area in light of a lot of existing projects such as the Cumberland Sweep, the interest in autonomous vehicles in this area, but also understanding the traffic conditions in this area as well as a result of a lot of major tourist attractions in this area. We should have the results of this study later on this year, and we hope to be able to create opportunities and bring projects into fruition as a result of it. So going into the methodology for service equity analysis, when completing an equity analysis, we use census data to compare the populations based on a quarter mile of the stops on the existing CobbLinc system, the eliminated or changed routes, and the impacted CobbLinc system. The CobbLinc threshold for determining both a disparate impact or a disproportionate burden are set at 25% of the cumulative impact of the proposed service change. If the difference in impacts experienced by the two populations, and the two populations being minority community as well as low-income community, is 25% or more, it is considered a disparate impact or a disproportionate burden. If those are findings in an equity analysis, then it is the responsibility of the transit system to create mitigation actions in order to minimize that impact. So going into the findings of the analysis for the green circulator, the proposed service change of removing the green circulator. Under the disparate impact, which is the impacts on minority persons, minority community, there were no disparate impacts found. With the green circulator service area, it overlaps a multitude of transit services that already exist. Then we'll talk a little bit about those alternatives. The green circulator also has a high proportion of minority persons in this area in comparison to our existing service area, but it did not pass that 25% threshold set in CobbLinc policy, as you can see in the table below. Going into disproportionate burden, which is the impacts on low-income persons, the findings were that no disproportionate burden was found. The green circulator service area, again, overlaps several routes that are already provided within the area, as well as it has a lower proportion of low-income persons in comparison to the existing service area. So no disproportionate burden was found to low-income persons. To now talk a little bit about alternatives for the transit service. If this proposal was to move forward, there are several opportunities and alternatives that already exist that would be available for customers and the community alike. One being the blue circulator, which provides access to Truist Park and the Battery, as well as the Cumberland Transfer Center. This service provides a similar like service span as our current green circulator, with weekday as well as weekend service. The next alternative is Route 15, which provides access to areas along Circle 75 Parkway, which is currently offered by the green circulator. This is inclusive of the Wellstar Windy Hill Hospital. The route operates weekday from 5 a.m. to 11 p.m. at 30 to 60-minute frequencies, and then on the weekend from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. at 60-minute frequencies. And then the last alternative that's available is Route 50, which provides an alternative to accessing destinations along Powers Ferry Road, which is currently on the path for the green circulator today. This is inclusive of the Wildwood Parkway area. This route operates weekdays from 6 a.m. to 12 at midnight with 30 to 60-minute frequency, as well as Saturday and Sunday with 60-minute frequencies. Now, as per CobbLinc Title VI plan, we identified a lot of different steps that are required when you're considering a major service change. And so just to kind of show you the list of the checks that have taken place, or all the different tasks, all the different things that have taken place prior to this point. Service equity analysis has been completed. It was posted on April 10th. A public hearing was completed on April 22nd by way of the Board of Commissioners. Public meeting opportunities have been provided. We've had 2 in-person meetings, one on April 17th, another one on April 30th, and now a virtual meeting on May 6th. A 30-day public comment period is currently underway, with the last day being May 9th, and then approval by the governing authority, which is our Cobb County Board of Commissioners, which is targeted for May. May. Now we are at our Q&A, and so all attendees can send questions through the chat. We have staff members that are able to help us kind of organize the questions a little bit. I believe Charles can help us with that. Charles?
Hey, good afternoon. Thank you, Morgan,
Good
for that.
evening.
I actually have some questions that have began to matriculate in. Give me
All right.
1 second.
Okay, awesome.
Somebody wanted to know, what is the difference between disparate and disproportionate impacts?
Okay, all righty. So just to remind everyone, and those are very good question. A disparate impact determines whether the proposed service change negatively impacts minority persons more than non-minority persons. The service equity analysis will compare the minority population of the existing and impacted areas to determine if 25% or more of that population will be impacted by the change. The disproportionate burden determines whether the proposed service change negatively burdens low-income persons more than non-low-income persons. And so again, the equity analysis will compare the populations of the existing and impacted service areas to determine if 25% or more of that population will be impacted by that change. So just kind of keep in mind, disparate impact is focused on minority communities being impacted, and disproportionate burden is focused on low-income persons being impacted. So very good question.
Thank you, Morgan. Thank you. Another question that came in to us was, who determined the measures in the service equity analysis?
Oh, that's a good question. So these measures were identified by the Federal Transit Administration, which requires transit providers to complete our analysis based on these impacts. And now this does not preclude Cobb County from considering other impacts as well as identifying transit alternatives, but these are measures and frameworks set up by our Federal Transit Administration.
All right. And final question, what route alternatives are available for the impacted areas?
Okay. Oh, no, it's a good question again. So just remember that we have existing services that already are provided by CobbLinc that are serving this same service area. We have the blue circulator, which serves the Battery to Truist Park area. As you can see on the map, there's going to be some slight adjustments where it's going to serve all of Truist Park and not the portion that is originally designed for it to kind of cut through. And that's some operational improvements in order just to help with OTP, which is on-time performance. We also have our CobbLinc 15, which serves Circle 75 Parkway, very similar to the green circulator, as well as CobbLinc 50, Route 50, which serves our Powers Ferry Road area, which is also a very similar path as the green circulator as well. All right. Any more questions?
No, that's all for right now. Thank you so much, Morgan, for those answers.
Okay. Okay.
Hey, Charles, can you hear me?
I can.
Yes. There's another question I see in the chat. Is it feasible to extend the Rapid 10 route up to Hickory Grove Park and Ride? This is the lot that the 484 terminates at, and is what CobbLinc is recommending as an alternative. Having both the 484 commuter and Rapid 10 weekend bi-directional service from the same park and ride would be an excellent benefit for current and future riders. This could also act as a lot for transit to and from Truist Park for Braves games?
I'll let you take that one, Theo.
So currently, our Rapid 10 operates on a headway. That's how long a trip would take, at about 140 minutes um, of runtime. It would extending the Rapid 10 up to the Hickory Grove Park and Ride would also increase the length of time that one trip would take. So um, we can look at it and do some more studies around it and see if it's feasible to continue as operating as a Rapid 10.
Thank you for that. And my apologies for not doing proper introductions, but Charles, we have Charles Clayton, who is our communications lead with the Department of Transportation, as well as Theo Letman, who is our transit division manager. So thank you both for being here and providing some responses to the questions. Thank you, Theo.
And there's another question that I see. Hello, I'm not sure whether you covered CobbLinc 100, Busby Parkway to downtown. My question relates to that route. I may proceed, or it can wait until you get to that part.
Yes, let's we actually we have another Q&A for the commuters, so stay tuned for that. Okay. All right. So to keep the time, let's go ahead and get into the commuters since we do have that question. So that it's a perfect pivot. All right. Okay. So now we're going to talk a little bit about the proposed service changes for commuter routes 100, 101, and 102. So CobbLinc, just a little bit of background. CobbLinc operates 3 commuter services. We operate Route 100, which is our service that provides from Busby Park and Ride all the way to the MARTA Civic Center. 101, which provides service from the Marietta Transfer Center to our MARTA rail line that has access to Civic Center and 5 Points, as well as our 102, which is serving our Aqua Park and Ride all the way to our Art Center station with the MARTA rail system. These services operate weekdays, starting with AM trips from starting as early as 5:30 a.m. to 8:30 a.m. and then PM trips starting as early as 3:15 p.m. going into 6:30 p.m. They have limited stops by way of the nature of commuter routes, providing access to our park and rides to their various destinations downtown and in the Midtown area. And they operate at about 15 to 30 minute frequency, depending on the route and depending on the trip. So the proposed service change being considered is the removal of the commuter routes 100, 101, and 102. Reasons for this proposed service change include alignment with the ATL Express network. For many that are unaware, the ATL, which operates our express service throughout the region, completed a regional effort in combination and coordination with Cobb County as well as Gwinnett County to really assess the commuter demand throughout the region. In light of a lot of changes that have taken place over the last few years between in response to the pandemic, but also in response to traffic patterns changing, people's commuting patterns changing. They wanted to have a better understanding of what commuter demand was looking like, but also their system was impacted by budgetary limitations. So we participated in a larger study, and in that study, there was a lot identified for coordinated opportunities for all of our systems to be better coordinated when it comes to commuter service throughout the region. In that was the recommendation of a more streamlined network of opportunities, more so within on the I-75 corridor for Cobb County, that would streamline the commuter services that could be available, and giving us an opportunity for a cost sharing and partnership for the 484. And we'll talk a little bit about what the 484 would be able to offer in just a moment. In this, we talked. We had a deep dive, pretty much, at what commuter activity was doing, looking at before the pandemic occurred, and looking at the activity as of present. And so, seeing the ridership seeing what the activity was doing, definitely required all of us to take a step back to reassess how can we better streamline commuter service throughout the region, and of course CobbLinc as a system in itself. And that's just another visual separating out the Route 100, the 101, and the 102, and what that ridership activity has been doing for the last few years. Sorry. Another reason for the proposed service change was consideration of the future funding challenges. As mentioned earlier, when it comes to when it came to the vote that took place in November, that resulted in us not having that local dedicated funding source, it did require us as a system to take a step back and determine what are going to be those opportunities for us to continue to provide the same quality of system. And of course, that does require the hard decisions in determining which routes are going to have the least impact to transit-dependent communities and environmental justice communities. In light of the regional work that was being done by ATL and the partnership opportunities by way of ATL, those 2 and 3 things kind of coincided together a little bit. And so this is one of those opportunities that we wanted to take in consideration and take for the board to consider. And then last but not least, just response to declines to regional commuter demand overall. So mentioned earlier, out of the ATL work that was done, but then also just the evaluations that our system has been looking at with the commuter services for the last few years, it's definitely required us to make some decisions. So again, just kind of talking through the methodology for the service equity analysis. So keep in mind that when completing the service equity analysis, we use census data in order to compare the populations based on the existing CobbLinc system, the eliminated or changed routes, as well as the impacted CobbLinc system. And so with that, we have a 25% threshold that is determined whether it is a disparate or disproportionate burden. Again, if the difference in impacts experienced by the 2 populations, being minority and low income, is 25% or more, it is considered a disparate impact or a disproportionate burden. And it is the responsibility of the transit provider to create mitigation actions to minimize that impact. So starting with disparate impact. So this is the impact on minority persons. So the analysis found that there were no disparate impacts found in response to the commuter routes that were being proposed to be removed. Each commuter route has lower proportions of minority persons compared to the existing service area on average. And then the cumulative impact of these changes is less than 25%, which is our threshold, as you can see with the table, the yellow table at the very bottom. Moving on to disproportionate burden, impacts on low-income persons. Keep that in mind. It was found that there were no disproportionate burdens found with this proposed service change. Again, each commuter route has similar proportions of minority persons compared to the existing service area on average, and then the cumulative impact of the change is less than 25% threshold, which is our threshold with the CobbLinc system. So let's talk a little bit about the alternatives for the transit service. And I know I mentioned it earlier about Route 44. So ATL's Express Route 44, which is not the existing version of 44, but the approved version that was approved by their board in April, would provide service from Hickory Grove Park and Ride to the MARTA rail system. It would provide weekday service with AM trips starting from 5:30 a.m. to 8 a.m. every 30 minutes, and then PM trips from 3:15 to 6:15 every 30 minutes. So for the different locations it would serve, it would be including the Hickory Grove Park and Ride, the Town Center Park and Ride, which is right next to Busby. It would provide service to Civic Center, as well as Arts Center MARTA station. Another alternative would be local Route 10, which operates from Marietta Transfer Center to the MARTA Arts Center station. This service operates weekday from 5 a.m. to midnight with 30 to 60-minute frequencies, Saturday from 6 a.m. to midnight with 30 to 60-minute frequencies, and Sunday from 7 a.m. to 11 p.m. at 60-minute frequencies. This is an existing service that is provided today. And finally, the local Rapid 10, which is operates from Town Center, our Busby Park and Ride location, to the MARTA Arts Center. This is our service that operates on weekday from 6 a.m. to 7 p.m. at 15 to 30-minute frequencies, Saturday from 6:30 a.m. to 7 p.m. at 30-minute frequencies, and Sunday from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. at 60-minute frequencies. This is also a service that is provided today. So just a reminder of the different actions that have to take place with the major service change when it's being proposed, and just kind of showing you the checklist of actions that have been completed so far. The equity analysis was completed and posted on April 10th. A public hearing was completed on April 22nd. Public meeting opportunities were provided with an in-person meeting on April 14th from 5:30 to 7:30. Another in-person meeting on April 24th from 5:30 to 7:30, and now a virtual opportunity on today. Finally, the 30-day public comment period will end on May 9th. We will collect all comments and it will be included in the final report. It will follow the approval by the governing authority, which we are targeting for this month. And this will be something that the Board of Commissioners, Cobb County Board of Commissioners, would approve if they move forward with this action. So we are now at our Q&A section for our commuter section. And so I will say for any individual that may have another question from the that's in reference to the green circulator, don't hesitate to ask us that question. It's not a problem. But we want to pause and allow for you all to give us a couple of to give us some of your questions, some of your comments, please.
Thank you, Morgan. I do have a couple of questions that came into me. One question was, can these routes ever return if demand increases or improves?
Yes, transit service can be implemented if demand increases. Funding will have to be identified, and the proposed service is ultimately approved by the Cobb County Board of Commissioners. If the Board of Commissioners see significant demand, and that would be by way of ridership on other routes, or just the commentary that you have with your commissioners, in which you all have the opportunity and the right to speak to, then yes, that is something that could ultimately be returned.
Thank you for that answer. Another question came in and said, the circulator ridership seems to be improving. Why remove it now?
Let me change gears here for a second. So I think we mentioned it earlier about just funding. So currently CobbLinc is funded primarily through local property tax revenue, with additional funding from federal sources, grants, and our fares that are collected. The failure of the MSPOS resulted in our need to really reconsider our current and our future budget constraints and our limitations, especially with our transit program. And considering just the future of our local funding, but also even our federal funding opportunities, and the increasing cost of operating just due to inflation, we want to make sure that we can keep the quality of our system and maintain it for the foreseeable future. So we really had to look at opportunities and potential reductions in services that would have the least impact on our environmental justice communities and our transit dependent communities. And so the green circulator was one that was identified to have the least negative impact, and allow for us to be able to reinvest back into our system in those areas that are needing that improvement a little bit more.
Another question came in and said, what is the connection between the Title VI plan and this process?
Okay. So with the Title VI plan, kind of keep in mind, so CobbLinc has its own Title VI plan that was approved by the Cobb County Board of Commissioners. And every time we make any updates, they have to approve that plan. It outlines the process for considering any major service change. And so in those service changes, like mentioned before, is inclusive of if we eliminate a route, if we reduce the route service hours by 20% or more, or if we eliminate 20% or more of the stops, that is considered a major service change. And so the process of that is outlined in that Title VI plan. It directs staff to complete a service equity analysis to ensure no negative impacts to the minority and low-income persons. It also requires us to execute a public outreach effort. And so that's inclusive of the public meetings that was mentioned earlier. It's inclusive of the public comment period, 30 days is required. And then, of course, it requires that the Board of Commissioners, our governing authority, approves it. And so, like, again, Title VI is that plan is updated frequently, and it is something that is not only updated and approved by our board, but it's also what FTA holds us accountable to.
Okay, I got one that just came in. It says, how is ridership determined? I take the 101 and the fare box is not working most of the time. Ridership has been up recently with return to work mandates.
I'm sorry, repeat the question. You said, how is ridership determined?
How is ridership determined? And also, has anything been taken into consideration with the return to work mandates?
Gotcha.
Like people coming back into the office.
Got it. Okay. So two questions. Okay. So ridership is determined based on our APC system. And so that's two different. So fare box is not what we use to calculate ridership. We have a separate system that counts, it's a people counter that as soon as a person enters the bus, it counts the person. And so that is what actually is calculating ridership and demand. We don't use fare box data to calculate that. A lot of as you mentioned, if a fare box is not working, then you can't calculate that. And so it's an industry standard. You don't use fare box information for ridership calculations. So we have a separate system that provides ridership information. And as far as the consideration of return to work, yes, we definitely are keeping our eyes on that. And so this is, again, like we mentioned, transit service can be implemented if demand increases or if there is a significant desire for it by way of our board of commissioners. And so I would say definitely voice your opinion. This is an opportunity and a time to do that. But it's also something that we're closely monitoring as well. We recognize that there's a significant amount of changes that's taking place in commuter patterns, and do understand that even with the return to the redefine the ride effort that ATL and Cobb County and Gwinnett County worked on together with, this was an effort that took, a good while. It didn't happen overnight. We were in a completely different administration altogether when we were going through the initial part of this process. So we are trying our very best to be as nimble in this process as possible so that we can be able to activate if we need to activate or adjust any routes as quickly as possible if demand shows it. But we have to see the demand for it. As you can see with I think some of the ridership information that we showed earlier, commuter ridership dipped completely. And I can actually, just to be, for the sake of visuals here, this is a reminder, we were, for CobbLinc, we were at 116,000 in FY 2019, and we've not returned anywhere near that. So, when we're having to make decisions and we're having to take things to decision makers, they're looking at these numbers. And so we have to be able to show justification for us being able to invest in funding, invest in these systems, especially in light of limitations in funding. The question. And
Someone said, what about service at the Marietta Transfer Center? What alternatives do customers have to get to the MARTA rail system?
That's a good question. So keep in mind that we still have our Route 10 and our Rapid 10. And so those are two services that are provided out of the Marietta Transfer Center. And for those, especially those that utilize that park and ride, both of those routes are provided all day, and they provide all day access to the MARTA rail system, with Route 10 operating every 30 minutes all day, and Rapid 10, which operates at 15-minute peak and 30 minutes on non-peak. So we have services that will still be available to you to provide that access to the MARTA rail system.
Keeping it on the topic MARTA, someone asked, why are there no routes providing direct access to MARTA's 5 Point station?
That's a really good question. We've received it a lot throughout this process. Like many systems in the region, CobbLinc is closely monitoring the access to the MARTA 5 Point station. For those that aren't aware, they will be they're starting renovation of their renovation project, which is anticipated to have detours, and I think that start, if I'm not mistaken, they do start this month. So we've been, like I mentioned earlier, this has been a process that didn't happen overnight in terms of us understanding or having to make the hard decisions of adjusting routes or making these proposed service changes. But we were aware of MARTA's schedule for their project, but we've been trying our very best to be as nimble and fluid as possible, and understanding that if that project was to move forward, there potentially could be detours that would make it a little bit challenging to get downtown. But in light of even just that construction project, there are a multitude of other construction projects that are also taking place downtown that is causing a lot of it's causing a lot of issues and challenges to get there and to continue to have operational efficiency of our routes. And so, again, we are doing our very best to be as nimble as possible. Things can change. And so I think the beauty of transit service is the fact that as things continue to evolve, we can make the adjustments if necessary. And so we are working very closely, not only with our MARTA partners, but also our other regional partners as well, so that we can do our very best to get people as close to the areas that they're desired to be at.
Yes, another question just came in. The current Route 484 is not a good alternative. Is there another option, one that can include going downtown?
Okay, alrighty. So that's a good question. And just to remind everyone, it's not the current 44 that exists today, but the proposed express route 44 has a different schedule than that existing service. So this is going to be, it's going to have trips from 5:30 a.m. to 8 a.m. With in the AM peak, and then 3:15 p.m. to 6:15 p.m. during the PM peaks. And so it will serve Hickory Grove Park and Ride, Town Center Park and Ride, Civic Center MARTA Station, as well as Art Center MARTA Station.
What is the transit alternative study that was mentioned earlier in this presentation?
I think you're referencing the green circulator. Okay, we went back to that. Okay, awesome. Okay, so for those, hopefully those that were here earlier when we were talking about the proposed service change for the green circulator, we were talking a little bit about the transit alternative study that is going to inform transit opportunities and transit access within the Cumberland area that's underway now. It's called the Cumberland Transit Alternative Study, which we being Cobb County Department of Transportation, along with stakeholders like the Cumberland CID, we are assessing transit access in that area in light of existing projects like the Cumberland Suite, which is the multimodal path. There's interest in autonomous vehicles, and they currently have a pilot called BEEP, as well as just the current traffic conditions that we have in that area. We have a lot of routes that traverse the Cumberland area now that are challenged just due to the traffic and just the growing attraction of the Cumberland area. And so this study, we hope to be able to develop some options that would be either a substitution for what the circulator is doing now, or provide us some more opportunities for operational efficiency for all of our routes. And then of course the other projects that like the Cumberland CID is interested in as well.
Thank you, Morgan.
Yes,
don't have any other questions in the chat. Let me just triple check. I'll read one. It's not any chance of an express bus from the Marietta Transfer Center? Just
so I would say, just like we mentioned earlier, transit services can be implemented if the demand increases. And so if there is funding identified for us to be able to provide that service, and then of course it's ultimately approved by the Cobb County Board of Commissioners, then there is an opportunity, yes. But we would have to see that demand, because just in light of what we have seen over the last few years, where our services, which were in the 150,000 or more, and FY 2019 is all the way down to like 20,000, we would have to really seize that demand. And so we have to be able to provide that justification to our decision makers regarding that.
I do not have any more questions at this time, Morgan.
Okay. Actually, I think something else I just saw something pop in. I'm looking now. There was a question about routes that go downtown, and secondly, using vans instead of buses to go downtown. So I'm just to kind of reiterate a little bit, we have, if the commuter services that are proposed, if they are approved to be removed from the system, then you still have access by way of your Route 10, which provides service to the MARTA rail system, as well as the Rapid 10 that also provides service to the MARTA system. So there is still access to the MARTA rail system in the Midtown area to provide a little bit more access downtown. The challenges that we have currently downtown is in response to the 5 Points project that is causing a lot of detours, but also a significant amount of construction projects that are underway downtown. And so we are trying our very best to be as nimble as possible as information becomes available to us, so that we can understand the path that can be cleared for us for our routes to go through downtown and not be impeded and cause operational inefficiency. So it is something that is kind of a moving target right now, but also keep in mind when these proposals came out, we were working on this for quite some time with the information that was available to us at that time. And so we are continuing to work with all of our partners so that we can figure out ways to get people where they need to go. And then the other question about the use of vans. We do have smaller vehicles that we're testing out, are called ProMasters, but they're utilized more so in areas that have less demand, just because they're not very big vehicles. When we're thinking about the capacity of a vehicle, we have to keep in mind the vehicle load that is necessary all day, not at one point in time. And so in a lot of our routes in particular, they have vehicle loads that would exceed a van. So we have to keep in mind that type of vehicle capacity that's necessary for a service that is out all day long versus just a period of time. Okay. All right. And I think I'm going to go to the next slide, which, all right, very good. All very good questions, and I'll give you guys some feedback on how you can continue to send questions, because we'll continue responding to questions until the public comment period is ended. But just as a quick reminder of the required steps in this process and the things that have taken place to date, we have completed the service equity analysis. We completed the public hearing, which took place on April 22nd. Public meeting opportunities have taken place. This is our last meeting, our virtual meeting, but it's not the last opportunity for you to provide public comment. That will close on May 9th, so that is Friday. So please feel free to provide your public comment, your project questions. Staff will do our very best to respond as quickly as possible. And then, of course, the approval by the governing authority. And so we are targeting this month for the Board of Commissioners to review and consider these service changes. If it is approved, these service changes will go into effect in June. So I would say if those that are interested in this, please continue to stay connected to the Cobb County Board of Commissioners webpage, or you can contact staff. We'll be more than happy to, as information and the agenda is released, we can let you know if it's something that is going to be on the agenda. And so we'll do our very best to respond as quickly as possible. And last but not least, thank you. Just thank you for the opportunity to come bring you information about something that's happening in your community. Thank you for your interest, and we appreciate all the comments that have been received, all the questions that have been received. Do know that no decisions have been made Board of Commissioners will make that decision ultimately, and so we are collecting all those comments, and we're doing all the necessary steps so that they can be informed in whatever decision that they do make. But for more information, please feel free to visit our Cobb DOT website. We have a transit tab that can take you directly to a lot of the alerts and a lot of this information about the equity analysis. And I've also included the email that you can send for questions or public comment. That is our CobbLinc, com@cobbcounty.org. Feel free to provide any additional questions or comments, and we'll, like I said, we'll do our very best to respond to as many questions as we can. But we are currently at 7 o'clock, and I want to